This is the story of a college boy that awakened a seemingly weak ability, but the dreams of millions. He awakened an ability to create and clone, so he basically can do anything and everything in the same time. This has to be the dream when we are lazy. I mean, we're always lazy. A monitor glowed faintly in the dark room while a notebook lay open on the desk. Bowls of food sat untouched in the kitchen. The young man thought about how many things in life he needed to do, yet how many things he wanted to do as well. While playing a computer game, the protagonist imagined himself sitting on a cliff and suddenly realized he wanted to travel. He pictured clinking glasses with his friends and wished he could spend more time with them. He imagined taking a girl's hand and understood that he wanted to go on dates. A smile crept onto his face. He wondered why a person could only do one thing at a time and remembered how he always wished for two bodies. Then his clone appeared before him. His dream had come true. People walked along the busy streets. A bully smirked and boasted that he would definitely receive an incredible skill upon awakening. His comrade laughed and suggested he might awaken something to boost intelligence instead. Moving through the streets, the boy found his life exhausting. The protagonist looked away and wished to get home as quickly as possible. A crowd moved ahead of him and again he longed for two bodies. A man lifted a microphone and asked for everyone's attention. The class hunter looked up and announced he would oversee the 10th Portal Awakening program. This was a government project meant to help citizens awaken abilities by having them pass through a portal. Waving his hand, Park Wontae wished the city's residents success and suggested they begin immediately. The first group stepped forward and lined up. Sang-woo raised his eyebrows, realizing his turn was approaching. A girl holding documents greeted him and asked for his number and group. He confirmed he was number 7 of the 37th group. She scanned his hand for identification, then pointed toward the portal and instructed him to enter. Leaving all his equipment behind, the young man stepped forward. Bright lightning burst from the black rift, startling the students. The protagonist closed his eyes and pressed his hand into the portal. User identification began, and moments later the system confirmed registration. Sang-woo opened his eyes wide and clutched his head as pain struck. He had briefly lost consciousness. The people soon found themselves inside a building where drones hovered beneath the ceiling. The guy frowned with disappointment, noticing many others felt sick as well. A girl summoned a fire phoenix and celebrated her incredible ability. Guild members immediately approached her, eager to recruit. A stranger walked up to the young man, smiling. He congratulated him on awakening and asked how he felt. The student stood and admitted he felt nauseated. The man reassured him it would pass and asked if he had checked his skill. The protagonist frowned and said he was just about to. A status window appeared. Sang-woo's eyes widened as he realized he had obtained the cloning skill simply by thinking about it. Looking over his stats, he felt disappointed. They were terribly low. He raised his eyebrows and opened the skill description. The system explained that the maximum number of clones depended on his level and currently was limited to 1. The student scratched his chin thoughtfully, but when he read that the skill had no special restrictions, his jaw dropped. He could use it for everyday tasks as well. The stranger folded his hands behind his back, assuming his friend had finished checking. The protagonist confirmed it and sighed that things didn't look great. Smiling, the man reminded him that all newbies start with weak stats and asked what skill he received. Not wanting to hide it, Sang-woo raised his eyebrows and said he had awakened cloning. The guild representative stared in shock before grinning. The boy blinked in confusion. Tilting his head, he asked if it was really that bad. The stranger explained that someone once awakened illusion cloning, but those copies had no physical form and were useless. The young man smiled slightly. His clones weren't illusions. The man raised his hands calmly and assured him that this was still better than awakening without a skill at all. He suggested showing the ability to the officials nearby for a proper evaluation. The student looked around and noticed a crowd forming behind him. He raised his hand, which immediately turned to stone. Guild representatives watched intently. The awakened man sighed sadly before asking where the exit was. The stranger smiled and explained that before leaving, Sang-woo needed to undergo a final scan and register with the research team. People entered the capsules one by one. White smoke surrounded Sang-woo. A man seated at a laptop confirmed his skill and reported a 73% chance of manifesting additional skills. He raised his eyebrows as he registered the cloning ability and sent the completed form to Sang-woo's ID bracelet. The guy looked at his bracelet and thought everything had ended faster than expected. A small wave icon shimmered on the display. He wondered what his new skill truly meant. The student entered his apartment and asked if his comrades had performed well. Several monitors lit up his desk. A battle raged on one of the screens as he sat at his chair. He placed his hands on the keyboard and began checking something. An inventory window opened along with a shield description he didn't really like. Lying back on his bed, the protagonist muttered that he didn't care. Staring up at the ceiling, Sang-woo reflected on the falling popularity of games and hoped for a new release. Resting his hands behind his head, he remembered he still needed to pay tuition and rent, and wished someone else could work in his place. He jolted upright as he remembered his skill. Glancing at his ID bracelet, he decided to test. Standing in the center of the room, waves of light gathered around him. An aura wrapped around his body. With wide eyes, the awakened one activated the skill. A blue haze shot out from his chest. Horrified, the gamer screamed. A dense cloud formed before him and bright light burst within it, briefly flooding the room. A figure lowered its hand as smoke curled at its feet. An exact copy of him had appeared. Sang-woo's eyebrows shot up. A white haze wrapped around the duplicate's bare body, but he stood firmly. The guy lifted his hand, eyes wide. He asked if this was truly a clone. His perfect double raised his eyebrows and confirmed it. The student stepped closer and asked if he could touch him. The copy allowed it. The awakened one tensed and embarrassed. He slapped his own face, trying to snap out of it. The gamer grabbed the double by the shoulder. The protagonist opened his mouth in shock, realizing this was a real physical body and not an illusion. A white haze conveniently covered the groin of the entirely naked clone. Sang-woo smiled awkwardly and said that he needed to put something on first. A wrinkled sweater lay on the floor and the twin quietly slipped it over his head. The guy then remembered he could issue commands. When he simply thought about asking the clone to sit, the copy immediately obeyed. The student smiled, surprised that vocal orders weren't necessary. The double stood when the awakened one mentally instructed him to do so, then sat several more times in succession. Sweat beaded across the clone's face from fatigue. The gamer touched his chin and concluded that the copy had the same stamina he did. His phone vibrated in his pocket. The protagonist took it out and saw messages from his comrade. A chat window filled the screen. Jangdu announced that he had awakened 2 hunter skills and told him to reply immediately. Sang-woo started typing while his clone struggled to catch his breath. In the chat, his friend assumed Sang-woo had received some ridiculous ability and began teasing him. The guy frowned and called him a non-stop chatterbox. Suddenly, a notification popped up in front of his eyes stating that his stamina had increased by 0.001. Far away, George stood on the rooftop of a towering building. He possessed the Flicker skill, an S-class hunter and the first person to clear Odin's tower, something no one had ever achieved before. In the main building of the Enlightenment Group, an elevator door slid open. A guild employee walked into the office and reported that analysis showed 80% of the city's 300 million residents had awakened. The guild leader asked how long it would take to reach full awakening. Glancing at her tablet, the woman explained that with the current pace they could expect 100% within 5 years. Gazing at the vast city, the jumper murmured that 5 years wasn't long at all. George stood by a panoramic window while a giant skyscraper pierced the sky. Meanwhile, the protagonist went out for a run. His face flushed red and glistened with sweat. Athletes resting on a bench noticed him and one joked that he might faint running in such heavy clothes. Sang-woo collapsed onto the bench. Someone handed him a bottle of water. The stranger smiled and encouraged him to drink before continuing. The guy opened his mouth but hesitated, and before he could reply, the young man pushed himself up and resumed running. The woman watched him go and assumed he must simply be an introvert. Later at home, he woke up and stepped onto the scale. 78 kg. The slimmed-down gamer pursed his lips. His body looked slightly more athletic. Scratching the back of his head, the protagonist realized he had lost 9 kilograms this month despite feeling hungry constantly. He thought it strange he wasn't doing much, yet his body improved day by day. Checking his notifications, Sang-woo noted all the stat increases and thought it made sense. People said awakening skills came from hidden desire. The guy sat in his chair and recalled what he'd learned while using the clone. He imagined punching the copy and sending it running around the park and confirmed that its pain and exhaustion did not transfer to him. After a grueling run, the double dissolved into thin air. Clones vanished once they took too much damage or exceeded their energy limit. The student looked at his twin. Its appearance directly mirrored his own. Even while the awakened one lay on his bed, the copy could continue exercising from any distance. The gamer clenched his fist and attempted to order the double to use its own skill, but found it impossible. The protagonist closed his eyes and admitted that made sense, otherwise he could create infinite clones. Sometime earlier, Sang-woo had been sitting in complete darkness at his computer. The Hunter wiki filled the monitor. He raised his eyebrows, realizing he never imagined this day would arrive. A search bar sat at the top of the page. He learned there were normal stats and special stats, though most people only possessed normal ones, and that unlocking special stats remained unknown except in rare cases. A status window appeared before him. His stats had increased slightly. The student smiled, convinced he had grown so quickly because his clone trained non-stop, doing everything possible to follow its orders until reaching its limit. The awakened one rested his hand behind his head and wondered if moving together with his clone would double the gain. The gamer picked up a gym flyer advertising personal trainers and full training programs. He looked up from the flyer as a battle raged on his computer screen. Sang-woo grinned and decided that he would be the head while his clone would be the limb. Unlocking his phone, the guy checked his balance. He frowned. He didn't have enough money to pay the gym registration. He gazed forward, remembering he had already spent too much on food. Looking away, he accepted he needed a part-time job. The awakened one placed both hands on the keyboard. He raised his eyebrows, thinking he should look for construction work since it would train his body and earn money at the same time. Scanning a list of job openings, he realized he needed to try things himself first. A clone couldn't succeed if both lacked experience. A listing for the Wukong Logistics Center appeared. They needed a delivery worker. The guy pressed the call button. Thinking it was the ideal job, he held the phone to his ear and explained he'd seen the advertisement. The manager said there would be no interview and he could come in immediately. Still sitting in front of the computer, the student replied that he wanted to start tomorrow, but raised his eyebrows when the employee asked if he could start today instead. Looking away, the awakened one said it was possible. The worker told him to arrive at the logistics center at 6. The gamer ended the call and wondered if anyone else even worked there. Leaning on his hand, the protagonist decided he didn't care as long as he was paid. Trucks rolled out of the center. Sang-woo shoved his hands into his pockets and assumed he had found the place. His clone's face was hidden beneath a mask and a cap. The guy glanced at him, thinking that if he claimed the clone was his twin, things might get complicated. The young man lifted his hand and instructed the copy to answer questions properly and call himself Young. Scratching his head, the student thought that the building was far too big and wondered where he was even supposed to go. The awakened raised his eyebrows in surprise when someone suddenly called out to him. A man approached with a wide smile and asked what brought him there. The gamer opened his mouth in shock when he recognized him. Chil shook his hand and laughed, saying he barely recognized him, after all that weight loss. The protagonist thanked him and explained that he came with a friend for a part-time job. The employee pointed toward the main building and said the office was inside. Sang-woo scratched the back of his head again and thanked him before the man waved goodbye and walked off. The guy covered his cheeks with both hands, thinking that his nerves were about to give out. Peeking through his fingers, the student asked if his copy felt nervous. Number one simply shook his head and replied no. The awakened one glanced down at his bracelet with newfound confidence, remembering that he had real strength now. The gamer marched forward and suggested they finish everything quickly so they could go home and eat ramen. Later, the exhausted protagonist lay sprawled on a pile of boxes and realized he had been far too confident because delivery work was brutally hard. Meanwhile, the clone lifted a large box with ease. A loader dragged cargo to a truck while a company employee sorted through crates in the warehouse. Sang-woo raised his head with effort, wondering if these workers actually had some secret skill for moving heavy items. Chil stepped in again, offering a hand to help the clone unload. The sweaty student realized he probably shouldn't have come at all since his copy was doing perfectly fine on its own. Trucks were parked in rows outside the center. An hour-long break was announced and the workers settled by the wall. Sang-woo looked utterly drained. Someone handed him a soda can with a friendly smile, explaining that he needed to rehydrate. The student thanked him. A local worker sat across from him and asked the name of this hard-working loader who hadn't spoken once. Number one introduced himself using a fake name. The worker grinned, assuming it was his first time doing such labor. Looking up, the awakened confirmed it and called the job pretty exhausting. Across from him, Chil chuckled and said both of them had courage. Most guys would have already run away. The gamer pressed his lips tensely, thinking that he definitely would have been one of them if not for the money. The man asked where he studied. The protagonist replied that he attended Gyeonggo University. The clone downed the soda in a single gulp. The worker complimented the school, but Sang-woo muttered that he didn't feel the same. The center employee urged him not to be modest, saying he'd give anything for his daughter to attend a school like that. Smiling awkwardly, Sang-woo told him not to worry about that and admitted that he had never been great in school but still managed to get in. Chil lifted his brows in surprise and asked how he pulled that off. The young man replied that he had earned a few licenses and a special permit. The man raised his hand proudly, saying that was a great path. Then after a thoughtful pause, the worker asked if his friend wanted another part-time job. The student's eyes widened, asking what he meant. The center employee reached out and offered to hire him as a tutor for his daughter instead of doing all this heavy labor. The awakened one froze in shock. The gamer looked aside thoughtfully, remembering the pitiful balance displayed on his phone. The protagonist frowned and hesitated, then asked if he would need to help her in every subject. Chil confirmed it, admitting awkwardly that his daughter was actually a terrible student. Spreading his fingers, he offered 50,000 for each 2-hour lesson a couple times a week. The boy looked away, realizing it wasn't a bad deal given the time and effort. He shook the man's hand, agreeing to help, and Chil thanked him warmly. Standing up, he promised to contact him after speaking with his wife and daughter, asking if Sang-woo still had the same phone number. The student confirmed it. The awakened looked up at the sky, hoping the tutoring would work out. A notification about increased stats appeared in front of him. The gamer grinned. He'd gotten both a job and stats. Leaving the warehouse, the protagonist suddenly remembered he still had something else to do. He opened his black bag, ready for a snack, but froze. It was empty. Number one was already eating his second sandwich. The boy smiled stiffly and shut his eyes. The clone dumped an entire bag of buns into his mouth. Sitting across from him, Sangwoo asked if he had seriously eaten everything. The next morning, the student lay on his bed, gritting his teeth and declaring that he was about to die. Dragging himself up, he decided the clone would handle the part-time job from now on. Another stat increase message popped up. The protagonist realized the twin was still working somewhere. Closing his eyes, Sangwoo called him back, thinking he had to recall him at home or the clothes would disappear again. There was a pot of soup on the table. Smiling broadly, the guy felt relieved he could finally eat something warm. But then he glanced toward the door. It opened and number one stepped in, announcing his return. The student stared at him and told him to wash up and change clothes. Water splashed in the shower. Dirty laundry piled in the basket. When the clone stepped out, the awakened approached him. The gamer frowned and asked him to hold out his hand. The double obeyed. The protagonist, tense and sweating, held a sharp needle. He remembered that once recalled the clone's body scattered like dust. It wasn't a real living being. Nevertheless, he pricked a number one's finger. A bead of blood formed. The clone stared blankly ahead. Sangwoo apologized quietly while dabbing the blood with a cloth. He wondered when the regeneration stat would finally unlock. He had read that regeneration came from consistently leaving wounds on the body. Leaning on his hand, he wondered if doing this for another month would activate it. But the gamer pressed his lips and admitted he was too scared to make any bigger wounds, so he should stop here. He then told the clone to eat ramen whenever he felt hungry and to continue training. Sangwoo handed him a spare phone, instructing him to take it to work and always answer calls. Morning sunlight spilled over the houses. The guy walked down the street with an advertising flyer in hand. Suddenly, someone grabbed his shoulder. He turned and saw his friend. The student brushed the hand away, saying it was too hot today. Gyeongdo stared at him, shocked at how much weight he'd lost. The awakened narrowed his eyes and said he'd been working out and was heading to the gym. Patting his stomach, the brunette said that it was muscle and asked which gym he planned to visit. The gamer answered that he was going to Strong Body. The man gave a thumbs up, saying it was a good place. The protagonist raised an eyebrow, remarking that it didn't seem special aside from the price. The guy smiled broadly and mentioned that the trainer there was an absolute beauty. Laughing, the young man grabbed his friend by the shoulders and suggested they go together. Sangwoo immediately realized his friend had no intention of exercising. Bright lamps lit up the corridor where a muscular man lifted dumbbells, treadmills lined the wall, an athlete pushed up a barbell, and someone casually ate meat with chopsticks. The two finally entered the gym. Scratching the back of his head, a local staff member apologized and welcomed them inside. Sangwoo explained that they wanted to register. The employees smiled and informed them that because of the opening event, there was a discount 3 months for only 160,001. Raising his index finger, the guy agreed to take the membership and asked if the trainer could check his form on the machines. Leaning both hands on the table, the man nodded and offered to assist with the payment. Inside, various machines filled the room. The young man attempted to lift a barbell, struggling with the weight. Rising from the bench, the worker demonstrated how to do an incline press properly and recommended gradually increasing the weight and improving his pace. Suddenly, an athlete let out a loud scream as he lifted a massive barbell loaded with 4 50-kilogram plates on each side. The spectators froze, mouths open, eyes wide. After finishing, the strongman secured the barbell back on the rack. Gyeongdo flexed his arm proudly, showing off his toned muscles. The trainer approached and assumed he had been working out for a long time, but the brunette replied it was his first day. Stroking his chin, the employee guessed he must have gotten a power boost after awakening and asked for his current level. The guy answered that he had only 2 units of power. Hearing this, the awakened friend raised his eyebrows in shock and realized that the mysterious skill his friend never mentioned was simply raw strength. A bead of sweat slid down his cheek. The gamer wondered how powerful high-class hunters must truly be if a basic strength boost could create such a huge difference. Sitting on the bench, Sangwoo understood why everyone talked about hunters so much. His phone vibrated. Answering it, he heard Dio Chiel's voice. Holding the device to his ear, he learned that the man had already spoken with his wife and daughter about tutoring and wanted to ask if Sangwoo was free now. The young man stood up and confirmed. Dio Chiel suggested meeting at his home to discuss things. As the bright sun lit the city, Sangwoo rode the elevator. Disappointed that Gyeongdo still hadn't registered even after showing off like that. The brunette pointed at himself and explained that if he joined the gym, his friend wouldn't be able to focus properly. The awakened one sighed and admitted it was really because the cute trainer wasn't there today. Looking down, the athlete confirmed it. Hands in his pockets, the gamer decided it was actually better, one less thing to worry about with the clone. Reaching the apartment door with the matching number, Sangwoo leaned in and heard irritated voices. Apparently, no one knew the tutor was coming. Suddenly, Dio Chiel opened the door, insisting he had to go to work so his daughter could tell the tutor herself if she disliked anything. As he turned back inside, he froze in shock. Sangwoo, who had been struck by the door, pressed a hand to his cheek. A schoolgirl stepped into the hallway, eyes widening. Still rubbing his head with a towel, Sangwoo met the gaze of a logistics worker who apologized for not seeing him. He assured them everything was fine. Someone placed a plate of sliced apples on the table. Smiling brightly, the woman said she barely recognized him. He explained he had been exercising lately and that they hadn't seen each other in a while. Removing the rag, he asked if the girl was his student. Her knees trembled as she blushed and nodded. Her parents grinned. Seconds ago she had been complaining about tutoring. Sangwoo introduced himself and asked if she truly wanted to enter Jeongguk University. Looking aside, she confirmed it, embarrassed because he had probably heard her shouting earlier. Smiling, he requested to see her grades before starting. Her mouth dropped in fear. He tightened his lips nervously as he checked the card. The second-to-last column showed her score was quite low. Covering her face in shame, she watched as Dio-chil hurriedly grabbed his jacket and ran to work earning a traitor from his wife. Looking up at the girl, Sangwoo reassured her, admitting his SAT scores weren't good either. She clasped her hands and asked if that was true. Meeting her eyes, he promised to help her get in and proceeded to discuss the class schedule. White clouds drifted over the buildings. Returning to his apartment, the protagonist realized the journey would be long. Earlier, he had pointed at the girl's notebook as she wrote diligently. Hanging his sweater on a hook, he felt relieved she wasn't nearly as hopeless as expected. Approaching his computer, he assumed that number one had already gone to work. Raising an eyebrow, he remembered giving the clone a spare phone. But if the number of clones grew later, he'd need to buy another. Sitting down, he opened the Hunter Wiki to search for skills similar to his own. The page displayed countless items for sale. He flinched when he saw a familiar skill priced at 100 million won. Tears almost formed when he noticed a teleportation scroll selling for 400 million won. Leaning on his hand, he thought he'd rather buy a house with that kind of money. Leaning back, he stared at the screen and wondered how long it would take to afford even one skill. Could hunters really make enough money to buy such things? Checking his phone, he saw a balance of only 200,000 won. Lying down, he sighed deeply. Hands behind his head, he questioned whether he should become a hunter. Opening the news feed for information, he eventually stood up again. Frowning, he realized he couldn't waste a skill like his on ordinary labor. Grabbing his sweater and pulling it on, he decided to try becoming a hunter. In the year 2000, portals appeared worldwide, unleashing armies of undead and powerful monsters. This event, later called the Great Catastrophe, wiped out over half the planet's population. At the same moment, superhumans with special abilities emerged. Hidden in the shadows, an awakened fighter watched as humanity barely survived thanks to these gifted individuals. Soon after, monster hunting became a profession known as being a hunter. Watching a video on his phone, Sangwoo listened as a lecturer explained that passing the test granted a state license to legally kill monsters. Removing his earbud as the teacher went over key tips for the exam, he suddenly found himself standing before a tall building, the Hunter Center. Stretching his shoulder, he thought that thanks to his vitality skill, even a few hours of sleep kept him alert lately. Entering the building, he passed an arms dealer showing a sword, a man assembling firearms, and a stranger with a wide-brimmed hat hiding his face. Sangwoo's eyes widened. Many people walked around, but only a few seemed there for the exam. A woman raised her hand and announced that registration for the licensing test held in the basement would end in 20 minutes. Lowering his head, he realized how nervous he was. A sign reading "Exam Room" hung beside the door. Entering, he apologized as everyone in the lecture hall turned to stare at him. Trembling, he wondered why there were so many examinees. A bully smirked and laughed with his friend. Then a man in military uniform entered, placing his hand firmly on the desk. Looking up, he introduced himself as Han Myungwon and declared that he would be their examiner. Frowning, the man explained that the licensing exam consisted of a written section, a practical test, and an aptitude check, and warned that anyone caught cheating would be permanently disqualified without the right to retake. He asked once more if everyone understood. The bully's jaw dropped. The protagonist tensed, feeling the weight of the atmosphere pressed down on him. Behind the lectern, the soldier announced the start of the exam. A white car rolled down the road. Inside, a man muttered that they would finish transferring everything by the end of the month. Angry shouting echoed through the earphone in his ear. Gripping the steering wheel, the driver told his boss to give him a moment and reminded him that he had only been in this line of work for a few days. Closing his eyes, he endured the barrage of complaints. The CEO of JM Agency let out a tired smile, thinking that this job alone could drive anyone mad. The agent commented that money never came easily and vanished even faster than sand slipping through fingers. His watch displayed 7:45 and he concluded that the hunter exam should be ending soon. The car crossed a long bridge. Above the protagonist's identification bracelet, a message appeared, congratulating him on attaining F-class hunter status. Sangwoo stared at it blankly. Scratching the back of his head, he wondered if passing this exam was supposed to be as simple as getting a driver's license. At first, he simply sat and answered the written questions, which turned out to be incredibly basic, just a matter of remembering a few facts. Then, at the shooting range, he took his time preparing, since they were given plenty of it, and the target was positioned ridiculously close. After that came the aptitude exam, which was nothing more than a moral conversation straight out of grade school. Looking down, he questioned how a profession that involved risking lives and using weapons could have such a shockingly low entry barrier. The student turned away as the evening sun cast golden light over the building. Sang-woo assumed the government wanted as many people as possible becoming hunters. Closing his eyes, he decided not to overthink it. Outside, people in black suits approached the new license holders, handing out business cards. One of them held a cup of coffee while chatting politely with a fresh hunter. Sang-woo guessed they were guild representatives searching for recruits. Someone handed him a card as well, congratulating him on passing. The boy glanced down and saw the name JM Agency. Jun-mo greeted him with a smile, offering cooperation and promising excellent deals for equipment and items. Scratching his head, Sang-woo thanked him. Suddenly a notification popped up. The student's eyes widened when he saw his cloning skill had leveled up and granted him another clone. Before the agent could say anything else, the awakened bolted off, shouting that he would get in touch later. The CEO burst into tears, begging him not to forget. As night settled, the windows in nearby buildings glowed warmly. The hunter rubbed his face and walked away. Number 1 stood waiting. The protagonist concluded that nothing could beat cloning. Another double formed from swirling smoke. The two clones stared at each other. Sang-woo grinned and said he looked forward to working together. He showed them a business card and announced that they were officially ready to begin hunting. Meanwhile, Jun-mo tossed the remaining cards onto his car seat, realizing he had handed out almost all of them. Straightening his tie, he hoped someone would call back. He gazed out at the towering headquarters of one of Korea's leading guilds. Inside, documents lay spread across a desk. An employee took a sip of coffee and pointed out that his colleague only needed to settle the amount listed in the documents. The agency's CEO lifted them and nodded in understanding. Then his expression tightened. The total prices for different monsters were printed inside, and they seemed suspiciously low. Troll blood alone should have been worth much more. Studying the page closely, the agent realized the discrepancy. From across the room, his colleague called him over with a smirk, reminding him that he had always dreamed of joining the guild. So it was time to learn how things worked. Jun-mo looked stunned. Setting his mug down, the man asked what they would have left if they followed every rule to the letter. The employee placed a hand on his shoulder and warned him not to interfere with guild internal affairs. Clutching the papers tightly, the CEO left, sinking into his car seat. He thought bitterly that he would have kept quiet if he had known how hard this would become. His phone rang inside his jacket. He reached in, answered, and heard Sang-woo introduce himself, saying he wanted to clarify a few details. Neon signs glowed across the buildings as the man entered a cafe. Sang-woo waved him over from a table. The CEO apologized for the delay, but the boy said he had just arrived. After ordering drinks, 2 cups of iced coffee rested on the table. Smiling, the agent asked if his client wanted to visit a territory suitable even for beginners. Upon hearing yes, he requested permission to hear Sang-woo's skill. The young man replied while holding his cup that his ability was cloning. Jun-mo touched his chin, recalling that cloning was generally considered a mere illusion-type ability, with no combat value. Sang-woo finished the coffee in one large gulp. The agent silently concluded that this newcomer possessed illusions that would contribute nothing in real hunts. Handing over a stack of documents, Jun-mo praised the skill politely and asked him to review the contract terms. Spreading the pages out, he recommended the slime hunting grounds, explaining that slimes were weak monsters and that hunters must wear masks and protective gear due to the toxic fumes. Sang-woo photographed the contract and said it would be manageable. The agent then mentioned the horned hare grounds, which had a safe shooting barrier, though the prey was notoriously slippery and not profitable. After looking over the paperwork, Sang-woo listened as the man explained that other low-class monsters included giant rats, but only the mentioned zones were guaranteed safe by the agency. The protagonist stated that both places sounded good and the item prices were appealing. Setting the papers on the table, he said he wanted to sign. The CEO smiled gratefully, took out his notebook, and asked which territory he preferred. When Sang-woo stamped the contract, he paused, because someone else had stamped it too. A bold red mark sat on the page. Jun-mo stared blankly. The boy grinned and clarified that he would be hunting in both areas at the same time. A while ago, a man sitting in his office asked if his client had the cloning skill. The man in the ninja suit confirmed it. Jun-mo raised his hand and asked him to show his ability. The awakened one raised 2 fingers and agreed. 2 illusions appeared next to him. Lightning flashed in the office and 4 copies of the skill owner appeared behind him. The agent smiled happily. The clone pulled out a sword from behind his back. The doubles pointed the weapon at their master. The manager raised his eyebrows and asked them to stop. The copies swung the sword. Several blades pierced the hunter at once. Jun-mo covered his face with his hand in horror. The client asked him to calm down. The man looked at him tensely. The The awakened one passed his hand through the sword and explained that it was not real. Junmo tried to touch the sword, but his hand passed through the blade. The clones turned into white smoke. Their master said that this was a good skill to distract monsters. The agent covered his face with his hand inside heavily, saying that he had seen enough. Now the manager opened his mouth in shock and thought that they had passed the cloning skill that he had come across. It was definitely related to illusions. In front of him sat a double of the main character. Junmo remembered how he held the contract in his hands. In his memory, the copy even drank a glass of coffee. The man gritted his teeth and realized that he had never encountered such a thing before. Junmo looked up and assumed that they were twins. Junmo closed his eyes and left. The guy pointed at his clone and decided that this was a reasonable assumption. The young man placed his hand on the shoulder of the double. He had an indifferent expression. The student explained that his skill can actually be confused with another, but it is not an illusion. The awakened one raised his eyebrows and said that he has another copy, but it is currently in the fitness center. The agent opened his mouth in surprise and asked if clones can really build muscle. Showing him his biceps, the hunter confirmed this, and added that his body also becomes stronger thanks to this. The manager realized that his client can raise his stats with the help of doubles, putting his hand on his chin. Junmo called it amazing and decided that this man has great potential since his skill is completely incompatible with F-class. The protagonist placed his hands on his waist and suggested returning to the issue of the hunting ground. Junmo raised his hands and asked if there could be problems due to the same person entering two places at once. The man raised his eyebrows and said that there could be problems with this since there is a record at the entrance. The boy shed tears and decided that his plan would not work. Pointing behind him, Junmo promised to talk to the association to find a way to solve the problem and asked if the client could come with him to scan the bracelet and show them his skill. The boy scratched his head and warned that he would not be able to use the skill until tomorrow evening due to the cooldown. Looking at him and his clone, the agent suggested meeting at the Hunter Center in 2 days. The manager took a pen and remembered the contract. The student picked up the seal and reminded him that he had already left it on the documents. Junmo suddenly stood up from the table. The man extended his hand and said that he was looking forward to their cooperation. The awakened smiled. They shook hands. The hunter looked at the man and said that the feeling was mutual. 2 days later, clouds were floating above the skyscraper. The protagonist looked around. Sang-woo looked back when someone called out to him. The agency executive adjusted his tie and noticed that his client had arrived quite early. The guy explained that he thought they were expecting him and asked if it was true that the association was located in the hunting center. The agent raised his hand and replied that most of the departments operated in this building. A small device issued a ticket with a number. There were many people in the building. A voice invited numbers to different windows. The center employee raised his eyebrows and asked if the visitor really wanted dual access to the hunting areas. Sitting opposite him, the young man confirmed this and explained that he had the cloning skill, but the identification bracelet existed and only one copy. The employee said that he was the first since the jumper to request a duplicate. While the employees were looking for the necessary documents, the student tensely pursed his lips and decided that this was quite expected since this was not a typical situation. Sometime later, the worker, putting a pile of papers on the table, explained that it was an application for a permit and asked the visitor to go to the government office to fill out the necessary documents. The heroes opened their mouths in amazement when they saw how many papers there were. Taking them in his hand, the manager promised to sort them out and asked his client to go to the showroom. The awakened one thanked him. Junmo handed the documents to the center employee. The hunter approached the girl in a robe. Lightning flashed around him. A completely naked clone appeared in front of him. The protagonist opened his mouth in fear. The woman adjusted her glasses. The mechanic was working on the machine. The engineer carefully looked at the bracelet. The old man raised his thumb and said that now the doubles can enter the hunting area by scanning their fingerprints. He handed Sang-woo the bracelet and explained that they took into account the possibility of simultaneous entry and exit from different places as well as repeated entry. The man put his hands on his shoulder and said that his skill was not seen before, not only in Korea but in the whole world. The guy hugged his double and said that it was time for them to go. The mechanic frowned in disappointment and thought that he would make a great research subject. The young man raised his hand and said that he had settled everything. Junmo congratulated him on this. The student smiled and was glad that the preparations for the solo hunt were finally complete. Raising his eyebrows, the agent confirmed this and asked if his client was going there right now. The awakened one said that he had no other business today anyway. The manager crossed his arms and asked why his copy was hidden behind a mask. The hunter replied that he did not want to draw unnecessary attention to him. Someone was watching their conversation from the balcony. The stranger standing in the shadows chuckled. Hae-song scratched the back of his head and was surprised to see this person here. Junmo looked back when someone called his name. There was a bang on the balcony. The guild leader jumped down. He smirked and stated that it had been a while since they had seen each other. The protagonist frowned sternly. The man furrowed his brows in disbelief and was surprised that his colleague was still dealing with hunters. Sang-woo looked up and realized that the man had just jumped from several stories. Jun-mo tensely pursed his lips. The agent bit his lower lip and said, "Hello." The scoundrel clutched his stomach and laughed at him. Hai-song looked down at him and asked who that boy was. The manager frowned and replied that he was a hunter who was affiliated with their company. The guild leader looked at him sharply. The man looked at the boy wearing a hoodie with a large inscription and said that everything was clear to him. He looked down appraisingly. The boy was wearing simple black pants and sneakers. The student looked away in displeasure when the villain suggested that he was only in F class. He uncovered his face with his hand and decided that his colleague, who used to work with C and B classes, had completely gone crazy. The guild leader opened his mouth wide and laughed because he couldn't believe that his comrade was supervising an F-class person and in such an awful hoodie. Jun-mo's eyes widened in anger. The awakened one placed a hand on his shoulder. A smile shone on his face. The man wiped away a tear. He loomed over the hunter like a menacing shadow and noticed that he apparently had something to say. The protagonist closed his eyes and grinned. Sang-woo rubbed his nose and said that he was very honored to meet the head of the guild, which is considered the first in the country. The villain put his hand to his chin and was glad that there was at least some common sense in his words. The boy covered his face with his hand and declared that his guild was the first in dungeon monopoly and hunting area bans. Hai-song looked up. A malicious grin appeared on his face when the boy said that he couldn't believe that he received praise from the guild leader who had the highest payout ratio in his favor. The student smiled widely and declared that he didn't even know what to do now. The man scratched the back of his head and called him quite brave. His eyes sparkled. Suddenly the villain appeared behind the awakened one and asked if his skills were the reason for his bravery. The hunter turned around in fear. The man in the black suit opened his mouth wide and called out to his boss. The assistant ran up to the boss. He was upset that the fun breaker had come. The guild leader let the protagonist go and decided to call it a day. He smirked and asked his name. Sang-woo tilted his head and suggested that he find out for himself. The man waved his hand, calling him funny and promising to see his colleague next time. The scoundrel headed towards his employee, who asked him not to act like that inside the building anymore. The heroes were sitting in the car. Jun-mo smiled awkwardly and thanked his friend for his actions. The guy leaned on his hand and explained that he couldn't just stand there and watch. From the driver's seat, the man asked if he knew about his relationship with the Song Guild. The young man lifted a hand casually and said that he found out about it while researching the agency. There wasn't much information about him online, but he did find one rumor that concerned his agent. An article from the Hunter Wiki up that the JM representative was a former Song Guild employee and warned that those who signed a contract with him would face the road to hell. Holding the steering wheel, the manager realized why no one was joining them anymore. The awakened one explained that people were simply afraid of being targeted by a large guild. Jun-mo asked why the client chose their agency in that case. A drop of sweat rolled down his cheek. The hunter threw up his hands and said that it was all because of the favorable payment ratio. His clone was sitting in the back seat. The protagonist smiled and added that he could trust his comrade if he didn't like something about this industry or the guild. The man's hands shook. The car drove along the highway. Jun-mo thanked his client. There were treadmills in the gym. The athlete's bloody hands were bandaged. His pumped-up legs trembled from the strain. Number one was lifting a heavy barbell. The trainer bit his nail in fear. The girl approached him and asked if this man would be okay. The gym employee said that he had already tried to talk to him, but it was pointless. The clone stopped when the notification sounded. The double put the barbell on the rack. He picked up the phone. The owner asked him to finish the workout and wait for him at the entrance to the gym. The copy drank a bottle of water in one gulp. The woman put her hand to her chest and noticed that the visitor had finally finished. Her colleague was happy with this news. Slugs were crawling on the ground. They were crawling along the walls and ceiling of a deep cave. Suddenly something hit the slug. The man was holding a large sledgehammer in his hand. The awakened one pointed a device similar to a vacuum cleaner at the slime. The capsule behind him filled almost to the brim. The hunter came out of the portal. The protagonist took off his gas mask and sighed heavily. Jun-mo approached him and asked how he was doing. Sang-woo replied that it was very difficult to breathe with the mask on. The man crossed his arms and explained that people usually did not come here even though the slug area was considered safe. The boy looked at the torn glove and concluded that he could not last very long here. The young man looked around. The JM executive explained that they could hunt here until the container was full and then simply replace it in the locker. But even a person with great endurance could not last more than 6 hours here. The agent scratched his chin and said that it was possible to stay here longer if he purchased a good gas mask and higher class equipment. The student frowned and said that he could hardly last even 2 hours here. let alone 6. The awakened pointed to his clone and offered him to do it. A gas mask flew into number 2's face. The double tied the laces on his boots. He pulled on rubber gloves. The hunter clenched his fist and wished him luck as the copy went after the slugs. The protagonist turned his head and decided to head to the field with the rabbits. Sang-woo turned around to call number 1, but he was not there. The boy pouted and remembered that he forgot to pick him up from the gym. The twin was waiting patiently at the entrance to the gym. The clone blinked in surprise. A white car stopped on the side of the road. The boy looked out the window and asked him to get in. The sun was almost setting. The student winced when Jun-mo asked why his client called the doppelgangers by numbers. The awakened one smiled and explained that they all looked the same, so giving them interesting names would be confusing. The man gave a thoughtful nod and agreed that names were not that important when it came to regular copies. The hunter frowned tensely and remembered that pistols were used to hunt horned hares, and the JM CEO confirmed this. The protagonist pouted and asked if he didn't need to prepare some equipment in that case. The agent looked away and said that he didn't need to worry about that and explained that he could use his own gun or rent the necessary items at the hunting grounds. The manager presented a bunch of different weapons and added that his client would have to get his own equipment because the rented items could only be used at the hunting grounds. Suddenly Sang-woo opened his mouth in surprise and asked what that sound was. Jun-mo smiled and said that they had arrived. There was a military base at the Eugenson hunter grounds. Soldiers guarded the outer walls, standing firm as the traffic controller waved his red batons to guide incoming vehicles. The guy stepped out of the car and remarked that this place looked nothing like the slug's territory. The man pointed forward and explained that this was the famous Eugenson territory where the first monster breakthrough occurred. The young man scratched his chin, recalling what he'd heard before monsters had burst out of a rift in the sky. Normally, portals didn't allow monsters to leave, which was why most hunting occurred inside them. But sometimes a demon managed to force its way past the barrier and attack the outside world. Waves of bright energy had erupted around the rift. That phenomenon was what hunters called a monster breakthrough. Standing by the car, Jun-mo explained that 5 years had passed since then and most high-ranking monsters had already been defeated, but scattered F-rank creatures still lingered, turning the area into a revered hunting ground. The student opened his mouth in amazement and asked if no one complained about all the noise. The heroes entered the building, finding it crowded with people. The agent pointed toward the gunsmith and said that everything they needed could be rented there. A box of ammunition slammed onto a table. The base employee picked up a rifle and said that with night vision goggles, earplugs, and bullets, the total cost would be 700,001. Clutching a credit card, the awakened muttered that this felt excessive. Waving a hand, Jun-mo explained that most of the price went toward the bullets, which would pay for themselves if they successfully hunted rabbits. He added that the price of one horn was comparable to a bucket of tears. As they rode up the escalator, the man said that their spot was on the 3rd floor of Building F. The hunter asked if the area was divided into zones even inside the base. Jun-mo looked back and said that they had arrived. He quickly covered his ears when a loud gunshot echoed through the floor. People sat on the building's edge firing rifles. A stranger smoked cigarettes and complained about constantly missing. Another awakened man held a dead rabbit in his hands, several more stuffed in a black bag. The protagonist blinked in surprise. The agent pointed to their lane. The manager squatted down and asked if his client was confident in his shooting skills. Sang-woo pulled out a rifle and smugly confirmed it. The guy studied the weapon and said he had only missed 3 times during the license exam. Jun-mo muttered that the targets there were quite close. The young man closed his eyes and admitted he even felt a little sorry for the horned rabbits. The student put in earplugs. The awakened took aim and declared that the animals wouldn't escape his eagle gaze. The man clenched his fist, grateful that everyone here wore earplugs. The hunter spotted a rabbit and shouted loudly that he had found one. The creature seemed to stare directly into the scope. The protagonist slowly pulled the trigger. The cartridge case flew into the air. The hunt began. 3 hours later, night had fallen, yet gunshots still echoed across the military base. Sang-woo covered his face with his hands. Lowering his head, he realized he hadn't hit a single target. The young man threw his head back in frustration and declared that none of it made sense. At that moment, the scope was pointed precisely at another rabbit's head. The animal lifted its ears. As soon as the shot rang out, it sprinted away. The student closed his eyes, frustrated by how fast they were. Not long after, Jun-mo approached and said it was time to go. Gazing at the night sky, the awakened realized he hadn't even recouped the cost of the bullets and decided to call it a day. Number 1 looked back when the owner called out to him. Sitting in a chair, the hunter instructed him to shoot rabbits with a gun, retrieve their bodies with a harpoon, and send him a message with one if he succeeded. The protagonist exhaled heavily, looking down in disappointment. The floodlights illuminated only a small portion of the hunting grounds. Jun-mo decided to head home. Later, lying in bed, the guy looked at his status window. He folded his hands on his chest, happy that number 2 was doing an excellent job handling the slugs. The student noticed his stats rising steadily. In his memory, Hai Song approached from behind and smirked. The awakened closed his eyes, realizing he still had a long road ahead. The hunter covered his mouth and yawned. In his mind, a horned rabbit rudely flipped him off. The protagonist admitted that catching those creatures had turned out to be a complete failure. He stared at the ceiling. Sanwoo closed his eyes and hoped that number 1 would at least catch a single rabbit. Suddenly, the phone on the pillow lit up. Countless messages appeared. The device vibrated non-stop. The clone was sending repeated messages with the number 1. Clouds drifted above the city. Signs lined the building walls. Junmo looked out the window when the phone in his pocket vibrated. He picked it up and said hello. Someone asked if this was the agency Hunter Sanwoo belonged to. The agent frowned and confirmed it. The manager of the slime territory urged him to come immediately and stop his client. Junmo's eyes widened when he learned the clone had been hunting for 24 straight hours. He grabbed his jacket and said he would arrive as soon as possible. The guy got up from bed, stretching, and said he'd had a really good nap. He checked his phone and assumed his double had run out of bullets. Sitting in the lotus position, the student scrolled through the messages. The awakened's eyes widened in shock as he wondered why there were so many. His mouth dropped open in amazement. The man entered the slime territory and paused, confused. Vials of red liquid were scattered everywhere. Junmo put a hand to his chin, wondering if the clone had actually filled every tank in just one day. Men in hazmat suits rushed to their colleague. Blood trickled from the holes in his gas mask. Junmo immediately put the phone to his ear. Sang-woo picked up and asked what had happened. Smiling widely, Junmo explained that his clone had filled every slime storage facility in just 24 hours, and told him to call number 2 back since they needed to bring in the cleaners. Sang-woo laughed awkwardly and asked if the cleaners could also be sent to the hunter ground, where dead rabbit bodies were scattered everywhere. Shocked men gathered around the huge pile of corpses. One guy muttered that it was already hard to walk through. A stranger crossed his arms over his chest and said he couldn't even count them. Someone filmed the rabbits with a camera. Number 1 sat on a chair and no one could believe he had caught all those rabbits alone. A man approached and told him his skills were unbelievable. He handed him a business card and introduced himself. Kim placed a hand over his chest and asked if the hunter belonged to any guilds. The clone silently stared forward. The leader of the recruiting team smiled nervously, deciding he needed patience since talented individuals were usually strange. The man behind him simply crossed his arms and left. A crowd of representatives from different guilds had gathered nearby. One of them muttered that the guy wasn't going to talk to anyone. The Brown Bear Guild member stared in disbelief. The men started cursing among themselves. At that moment, Sang-woo placed a container beside his clone. The awakened one looked up and said those were extra bullets. The box was filled with them. Sang-woo told the double to continue hunting and hand the corpses over to Junmo. He placed a hand on the clone's shoulder and praised him for the excellent work. The twin lifted his hands with excitement. Number 1 picked up his rifle again, and the people around them opened their mouths when he immediately resumed hunting. They gathered around, eager to watch him continue. Sang-woo realized he had underestimated his clone's potential. Study materials were scattered across the table. Holding a pen, he thought about how the doubles now possessed 50% of his stats, meaning they should be roughly half as weak as him. He noted their instinct to finish tasks automatically and their ability to make instant decisions. The pen slipped from his hand when someone called out to him and asked what was wrong. She tilted her head, wondering what he was thinking about. Handing her a sheet of paper, Sang-woo apologized and said her results had improved since their last meeting. The girl brightened but still wanted her question answered. Leaning on his hand, Sang-woo told her he had visited the hunting grounds and that things went far better than he expected. Her mouth fell open and she asked if he was actually a hunter. She stood up, claiming she had no idea. Picking up her phone, she asked if her teacher knew the hunter everyone online was talking about. Sang-woo asked who she meant. He choked when she showed him a video of the so-called god of shooting, Eagle Eye. His eyes widened as he asked who they were referring to. The video showed a mountain of corpses. She explained that the internet was losing its mind and that the hunter had already killed over 200 rabbits when the footage was taken, setting a new record. People recorded number 1 on their phones, but he didn't respond to any questions. The clone tugged his cap down and muttered only one phrase, Eagle Eye. Those around him assumed it was his nickname. The girl's mouth dropped in shock. Staring at her phone, she said she dreamed of becoming a hunter. Sang-woo asked if she had awakened yet. She looked aside and admitted she had a license but was scared to enter hunting grounds. She nervously pressed her lips together. Tucking her hair behind her ear, she asked if her teacher would go hunting with her if she earned a good grade. Sang-woo promised to take her only if she could get into university. The girl brightened and asked if he meant it. He confirmed and added that he knew some safe hunting spots. She lifted her little finger and asked him to promise. He smiled. Their pinkies linked. She hoped he wouldn't change his mind. A gust of wind lifted the curtains. She encouraged him to keep going and said she would definitely enter university. Later, someone opened the door. Haeyeon's mother turned and stared with wide eyes. Sang-woo smiled and said the lesson was over. Haeyeon, who had been eavesdropping, heard him calling her talented and saying she had nothing to worry about. As he turned away, he said he would return on Monday. Haeyeon was sweating from excitement. She jumped onto her bed, thrilled that they would meet again. Staring at the glowing sphere, she whispered that he was a hunter and that was why everything went smoothly. She smiled, remembering she originally disliked the idea because he knew her father. She pictured his face again. She recalled how he pointed at the notebook and explained things and how gently he smiled. She blushed, thinking he was kind, clear, and handsome. Her head lowered, then suddenly she sat straight and shouted that she needed to study. Night eventually fell. Sang-woo entered the shelter, wondering if the corpse gathering was finished. Director Jun-mo's eyes widened the moment he saw him. Sang-woo approached and asked if they were there too. Jun-mo raised his hand and asked where he had been, reminding him that he was supposed to check the gathering site. Sang-woo answered that he had been tutoring. A man lifted a monster carcass while Jun-mo explained he had called the gathering team to multiple hunting grounds before. Yet this was the first time he needed this many people to collect horned rabbits. Workers loaded the carcasses into boxes. Standing among them were 352 workers in total. Jun-mo crossed his arms and asked if Sang-woo had checked the settlement he sent. Sang-woo picked up his phone and admitted he turned off notifications so he hadn't seen it yet. When he finally looked, he realized he had received over 30 million won from the agency. His jaw dropped and he let out a scream. Sang-woo smiled and asked if it was really supposed to be that much. Jun-mo widened his eyes and said that his hunting skills were above F class, so he changed the calculation to 83%, which is equivalent to E class. Sang-woo put his hand to his head and thanked him. Suddenly, a man opened his mouth and called out to them. They all turned around. The man pointed his finger at him and asked if he was the manager of that worm. He pointed his finger at the clone of the protagonist. Jun-mo stood in front of him and asked the man who he was. The man frowned and said that he was a hunter whose prey was stolen. He looked at the machine gun and said that all the horned rabbits he aimed at were killed by him, so today's hunt was a complete failure. He grabbed his shoulder and said that he thought they should compensate him for his expenses. A drop of sweat rolled down Jun-mo's cheek. He put his hand on his chin and told the protagonist that they seemed to have chosen the wrong spot. And Sang-woo said that he didn't know there were people like that. He put his hand on his chin and thought about it. The protagonist looked at him and said that he had an idea. The man frowned and wondered with displeasure what they were whispering about. He extended his hand and said that he had a conscience and therefore he only wanted 10% of the profits. Sang-woo's mouth opened wide. The stranger frowned and asked why he was laughing. Sang-woo put his hand on his clone's shoulder and said that the guy wouldn't be coming for a few days. He then pointed to the side and told Jun-mo that they needed to go, but the man started yelling angrily. They passed him and the protagonist asked why they didn't go sit at the coffee shop on the corner. The stranger grinned terribly in anger. He raised his hand and shouted for Sang-woo not to ignore him. The protagonist frowned and number one's eyes lit up. His fist was right in the clone's face. The man punched the protagonist's clone. The clone flew back from the punch. It hit several boxes like a ball. Eventually, it hit the wall and stopped. Blood started coming out of number one's mouth. The man opened his mouth wide and shouted that he hadn't hit him that hard. Sang-woo was holding his phone and shouting about how cruel the man was. He opened his mouth wide and started talking about how this was an act of violence on a sacred hunting ground so people wouldn't let it go that easily. The stranger looked around and was very worried. The protagonist closed his eyes and exclaimed that it would be really bad if this video leaked online, while at the same time he thought that it would be shocking news. The man frowned and lowered his head. Sang-woo showed him the video. The man stood with his head down and Sang-woo suggested that they part ways on good terms. The man suddenly bared his teeth and finally resigned himself to it. After a while, they were sitting in a cafe. The protagonist opened his eyes wide and asked about the Haesong Guild. Jun-mo pointed and said that he thought the hunter who attacked him today belonged to that guild. The clone was also sitting next to them and Jun-mo said that since the Haesong Guild is huge, all kinds of people gather there. The protagonist extended his hand and asked how Jun-mo knew that the man was from the Haesong Guild. The agent remembered the man sitting behind him and so he said that the hunter had been keeping an eye on him ever since he came to collect the corpses. A tear rolled down his cheek and he became worried about something. Sang-woo frowned and said that he understood that they might want revenge. Jun-mo closed his eyes and said that they did this because they thought that his clone was another hunter who had made a contract with them. Even before that, the hunters of the agency were being bullied. Sang-woo drank juice while Jun-mo was talking about how they did not stay with them for long and everyone was leaving. At the moment, only a few F-class hunters remained, including Sang-woo. He lowered his head and said that even now he cannot promise that there will be no more problems from the Haesong Guild. Sang-woo handed over a glass and asked not to force him to change his mind because he already knew everything, but he still joined, so Jun-mo does not need to worry. A drop of sweat rolled down the man's cheek. Sang-woo widened his eyes and said that he will not let them get away with this. Then Sang-woo smiled and said that he has a plan to become stronger in a short time. He raised his hands and began to talk. Junmo looked at him in surprise. They continued to sit at the table and discuss the plan. After a while, Sangwoo smiled and asked Junmo what he thought about it. The man put his hand to his chin and said that he had never thought about it. He started writing something in a notebook and said that he was free tomorrow afternoon. He suggested meeting at a hunter shop. There were many hunters in the building. The trade in weapons, armor, and other items for hunting was from the very beginning. Many hunters were walking around the shop. These department stores got into the hunting industry, taking over a large part of the market. Thanks to this, you can find everything you can imagine here. Sangwoo put on the armor. The consultant extended his hand and said that this protective gear is made of titanium. It will provide Sangwoo with guaranteed protection from E-class monsters. Sangwoo smiled and said that the armor is quite light and comfortable, so he likes it. He picked up a knife. Sangwoo tested its sharpness and said that he would be mastering pistols, so he thought that was enough. He turned around and asked the consultant to give him 2 more sets of weapons and armor. After a while, he was holding a suitcase with equipment in his hands. Junmo looked at him and reminded him that Sangwoo also said that he needed skills. Sangwoo looked away and said that he was looking for familiar skills, although he was not sure if there was one here. Then they entered a store. There was a shiny sphere on the table. Sangwoo looked at the display case. He looked at the sphere and happily exclaimed that this was what he was looking for. Sangwoo looked at the description of this item, which allows the hunter to share his senses and vision with the creatures and pets he summoned. However, this item costs about 129 million won. Sangwoo covered his eyes with his hand. He waved his hands and said that he thought it was time to take their relationship to the next level. Junmo looked at his phone and said that he wasn't sure if it was enough, but he thought he could lend Sangwoo 50 million won right now. Sangwoo smiled and said that he thought he could handle the rest. He looked at the sphere again and told him not to worry. In the reflection, he could see Sangwoo's face saying that if things didn't go as planned, they would recoup their investment in no time. After a while, he put the items on the floor. Sangwoo was reading the instructions. He opened his eyes wide and said that he needed to pour mana into the sphere, and for users who couldn't control the mana, he needed to turn on the sphere while keeping it in contact with their body. Sangwoo picked up a remote control and wondered if it was a power button. He placed his hand on the sphere. His face was tense and his hand was shaking. Sangwoo closed his eyes and pressed the button. A bright light lit up the room. Nothing could be seen because of the strong light, and after a moment the system notified him that a new level 1 skill had been created. Sangwoo looked at his hands in shock. Then he looked to the side and found that the skill ball had disappeared. The youth clenched his fists and mentally said that the skill was now ready to use. He knelt down and ordered the clones to come over. The clones began to walk towards him. They were dressed in the armor that Sangwoo had bought for them. Sangwoo looked at them and said that it was time for them to go. After a while, Sangwoo raised his hands and asked Junmo what he thought of the results of the hunt. Junmo raised his hand and said that of course everything went great, and he had not expected such a result. Sangwoo frowned and pointed out that the endurance, agility, and even the clones he created were only half of his real capabilities. Yet one clone had managed to kill more than 300 rabbits. A man suddenly punched the clone in the face. The clone flew back, and Sangwoo noted mentally that he had ordered the copy to take the hit and suffer in the most dramatic way possible. After all, perfectly timing a punch and willingly putting your face in front of it wasn't easy. Sangwoo then looked at Junmo and remarked that he believed the man could actually punch the clone full force if he wanted to. Junmo widened his eyes and asked if Sangwoo was implying that despite their low stats, the clones still had superior control and coordination. Sangwoo gave him a thumbs up and said that he intended to take full advantage of that fact. He raised 2 fingers, saying they needed to visit 2 places first. He explained that the first stop was a training ground where he planned to learn long-range and close-range attacks using different weapons. A man in a kimono noticed them and happily asked whether they had come to register. Another man wearing a cap grinned and said he would prepare everything for their shooting lessons. Sangwoo walked in with 2 of his clones following, and all 3 began training. The 2 instructors stared in shock. In sparring, the clones immediately demanded to start fighting, skipping all basic steps. At the shooting range, they instantly reached for the firearms as if they had trained for years. During sparring, the man knocked the staff from his partner's hands and explained that they should aim for the arm to make the opponent drop the weapon. Then he turned to Sangwoo and asked if he was a hunter, wondering why he wanted to fight so quickly. At the shooting range, the instructor removed his cap and asked if they even knew what clay pigeon shooting was, and whether they were certain about handling a real gun. Both clones frowned confidently and said they were sure. The second clone gripped wooden sticks. The first clone held a real gun. The instructor lifted the remote control and announced that they were starting. The man in the kimono stretched his hand forward and began a countdown. One clone rushed into combat while the other began firing at clay pigeons. The second clone struck the bald instructor with his stick. The first clone shot a flying plate and shattered it instantly. The trainer's eyes widened in disbelief. The shooting instructor looked up in shock. The second clone twirled his sticks while the first calmly held the firearm. Meanwhile, Sangwoo sat at a table drinking juice, explaining to Junmo that he needed the familiar skill. Junmo's eyes widened again as he realized what Sangwoo meant. The agent asked if that wasn't the skill that let a hunter share vision with a summoned creature. Sangwoo replied that it wasn't just vision. What mattered was that all senses merged, including smell and touch. Sangwoo positioned himself in front of several tin cans, thinking about how this skill would work while his clones were training, fighting, and shooting. He closed his eyes and activated the ability. A blue aura bloomed around him. The surroundings darkened as his senses expanded. He felt everything. The first clone was engaged in combat. A bald man rushed toward him. The second clone frowned and tilted his head back, effortlessly dodging the strike. Sangwoo felt the angle of every joint, the balance of each stance, the weight shifting through the body. The clone slipped back again. Then the clone lifted his head and Sangwoo felt the coordinated tension of muscle movements and the flow of power gathering. Meanwhile, the first clone drew a gun. He aimed forward and Sangwoo felt the focus of the gaze, the precise alignment of the barrel, the direction of the shot. The trigger was pulled. A clay plate flew up. The bullet struck it and shattered it mid-air. Sangwoo's blue aura surged. His eyes remained closed as he absorbed the sensation of every movement, every breath, every strike, every shot. He smiled slowly and said that he could have all of this. The aura swirled violently around him. He looked at his hand, lowering his head as he processed the overwhelming experience he had just witnessed through his clones. He remembered the pressure of the air when a stick flew past his face. He could almost smell the gunpowder again, feel the recoil jolt through his arm. His hand trembled. His body was exhausted. He imagined himself as a puppet, realizing he hadn't moved on his own at all. Every action had been handled by his clones, and all he did was share the sensations. Sangwoo pictured how to aim and mentally repeated that he was experiencing the movements of clones with bodies identical to his own. He glanced at his hand, wondering if he could imitate those movements right now. Then the system notified him that his strength and reaction speed had increased. Sangwoo stretched his fingers, warming up his hands, and said that today he would try sparring and shooting. He closed his eyes and activated the skill. A blue aura enveloped him.